The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beneath the midnight sky on March 15, 1997, its dark waters concealing more than just marine life and underwater mountains. At approximately 2:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, radar stations from Hawaii to California detected something that shouldn't have existed, something that would trigger the most extreme military response ever considered in human history. The object was massive, roughly 3 kilometers in diameter according to the initial readings, hovering motionless at an altitude of 80,000 feet, directly above the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. It hadn't arrived through any trajectory our satellites could track. One moment the sky was empty, the next moment it was there, as if reality itself had simply blinked and accepted its presence. Within minutes, the Situation Room at the Pentagon was fully operational, emergency protocols activated, and the president was being rushed to a secure bunker beneath the White House. Colonel James Morrison was the first military official to receive the complete radar data that night. A career Air Force officer with 30 years of service, Morrison had seen his share of unexplained aerial phenomena, but nothing had prepared him for what appeared on his screen at NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain facility. The object wasn't just large, it was geometrically perfect, a massive triangular craft with edges so precise they seemed to cut through the atmosphere itself. The radar returns showed a metallic composition unlike anything in our databases, with electromagnetic signatures that fluctuated in patterns that seemed almost organic, as if the craft itself was breathing. Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the red phone, the direct line to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His voice was steady but urgent when he spoke the words that would set everything in motion. "We have a Code Sierra situation, confirming visual and radar contact with an unidentified craft of extraordinary size. This is not a drill." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 20 minutes, F-22 Raptors were scrambling from Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, their pilots briefed only that they were to observe and report, maintaining a minimum distance of 5 miles from the target. Captain Sarah Chen was leading the flight group, her voice calm over the radio as she guided her squadron toward the coordinates. What she saw when they arrived would haunt her for the rest of her life. The craft hung in the air like a geometric impossibility, its surface neither reflecting nor absorbing light, but somehow doing both simultaneously. It was covered in what appeared to be symbols or patterns that shifted and changed, never quite the same when you looked at them directly. The edges of the craft seemed to blur into the night sky, as if it existed partially in our dimension and partially somewhere else entirely. Chen's instruments went haywire as they approached the minimum safe distance, electromagnetic interference causing her heads-up display to flicker and fail. She pulled back, ordering her squadron to maintain position, and reported what she was seeing to command. Back in Washington, an emergency session of the National Security Council was convening in the Situation Room. Present were Secretary of Defense William Harrington, National Security Advisor Dr. Patricia Williams, CIA Director Robert Stone, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Marcus Bradley, along with a handful of others with the highest security clearances. The President, Thomas Walker, entered the room at 3:15 a.m., his face grave as he took his seat at the head of the table. The briefing was swift and terrifying. The craft had made no aggressive moves, but its mere presence represented a threat level beyond anything they had prepared for. Its size alone meant it could potentially carry thousands, perhaps millions of whatever entities had constructed it. The electromagnetic anomalies it was generating were interfering with satellite communications across a significant portion of the Pacific. Most disturbing of all, attempts to communicate with the craft using every frequency and method available had yielded nothing but silence. Dr. Patricia Williams, a former physicist before entering government service, was the first to voice what everyone was thinking but afraid to say. "Mr. President, we need to consider the possibility that this is a prelude to something larger. The craft's position over the Pacific, specifically over the Mariana Trench, may not be coincidental. If their intention is hostile, we need to be prepared for a first strike option." The room fell silent at her words. General Bradley cleared his throat and opened a black folder marked with classification stamps that most people in the room had never seen before. "Sir, there is a protocol for this scenario. It was developed in 1962, updated periodically, most recently in 1991, Operation Sundown. It calls for the deployment of our entire Pacific nuclear arsenal in a coordinated strike pattern designed to overcome any defensive capabilities and craft of this nature might possess. The president's face paled as Bradley continued outlining the plan. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles from 3 Ohio-class submarines currently on patrol would launch simultaneously with land-based ICBMs from Vandenberg Air Force Base and Minuteman silos in Montana and North Dakota. The total yield would exceed 50 megatons, delivered in a pattern calculated to ensure complete destruction even if the craft possessed energy shielding or other defensive technologies. The electromagnetic pulse alone would black out electronics across most of the Pacific Rim. Estimated civilian casualties from radiation and fallout were projected in the millions. It was madness, but it was planned madness. A response to the ultimate scenario that military strategists had hoped would never come to pass. As the discussion continued, new information kept arriving. The craft had begun to emit a low-frequency hum that was being detected by hydrophones throughout the Pacific. Marine biologists were reporting mass migrations of sea life away from the area beneath the craft. Seismic sensors were detecting unusual activity along the Pacific Ring of Fire as if the mere presence of the craft was somehow affecting tectonic plates. Most unnervingly, people living along the Pacific coast from Alaska to Chile were reporting vivid identical dreams of massive waves and brilliant lights in the sky. The phenomena was too widespread to be coincidence, suggesting the craft was somehow interfacing with human consciousness on a massive scale. At 4:00 a.m. something changed. The craft, which had remained perfectly still since its appearance, began to descend slowly toward the ocean surface. Its rate of descent was measured at exactly 100 feet per minute, so precise it seemed intentional. Like a countdown. At this rate, it would reach sea level in approximately 13 hours. General Bradley turned to the president. "Sir, if this craft enters the ocean, we lose any tactical advantage we might have. The nuclear option becomes significantly less effective underwater, and we have no idea what capabilities it might have once submerged. If we're going to act, it needs to be before it reaches the water." The president asked the question that would determine the fate of millions. "How long do we need to prepare for Operation Sundown?" Bradley's answer was swift and certain. 90 minutes from your authorization, sir. The assets are already being moved into position. Dr. Williams interjected with a crucial observation. "Mr. President, we should consider that the craft's slow, deliberate descent might be intentional communication. It's giving us time, perhaps, to make a decision or to attempt further contact. Destroying it might be exactly the wrong response," CIA Director Stone countered immediately. "Or it's giving itself time to deploy whatever weapons or entities it carries. We could be watching an invasion force preparing for deployment. The risk of inaction could be catastrophic." The debate that followed was heated but brief. Time was not on their side. Every minute that passed brought the craft closer to the ocean, and potentially beyond their reach. At 4:30 a.m., the president made a preliminary decision. Operation Sundown would be prepared but not executed. They would use the time the craft's descent provided to attempt every possible form of communication, and to gather more intelligence. Nuclear submarines, USS Ohio, USS Michigan, and USS Florida, received encrypted orders to move into position. Missile silos across the western United States began their activation sequences. B-2 Spirit bombers were loaded with nuclear payloads and placed on Ready 5 alert. The machinery of apocalypse was set in motion, waiting only for a final word to unleash hell itself. Meanwhile, at a classified research facility in Nevada, Dr. Marcus Webb was pulled from his bed and rushed to a secure communications room. Webb was perhaps the world's leading expert on exotic propulsion systems, and had spent the last 2 decades studying what he called non-terrestrial technology signatures. What he saw when he reviewed the data from the Pacific craft made his blood run cold. "This isn't their first visit," he told the assembled officials via secure video link. "The electromagnetic patterns match atmospheric anomalies we've recorded, but never explained. dating back to 1947. Roswell, Phoenix, the Chicago O'Hare incident. They all show similar signatures, but this one is different. This one isn't trying to hide. When asked what he thought their intentions might be, Webb could only speculate. The positioning over the Mariana Trench suggests they're interested in the deepest part of our ocean. Perhaps they've been here before. Perhaps they left something behind. Or perhaps they're preparing to retrieve something. The slow descent could be a pressure acclimation process. Or it could be, as Dr. Williams suggested, a form of communication, giving us time to prepare or respond. As dawn approached on the west coast, the craft had descended to 60,000 feet. Commercial air traffic across the Pacific had been completely rerouted. The official story released to the media was a large-scale military exercise, but rumors were already spreading across the internet. Grainy photos taken with telephoto lenses were appearing on conspiracy forums. Videos of the strange lights in the sky were going viral. The government's ability to control the narrative was slipping away with each passing hour. Soon the whole world would know that something unprecedented was happening over the Pacific Ocean. The sunrise over the Pacific on March 16 painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, but the massive craft hanging in the air absorbed the light like a void, creating an unnatural shadow that stretched for miles across the ocean's surface. By 6:00 a.m. the object had descended to 45,000 feet, and with the daylight came the first clear photographs that would later be leaked to news outlets around the world. The craft's true scale became apparent when commercial airline pilots, defying orders to maintain radio silence, began reporting that they could see it from as far as 500 miles away. It wasn't just large, it was impossibly large. A floating city of unknown origin and purpose that challenged everything humanity thought it knew about physics and engineering. In a secure bunker beneath Mount Weather, Virginia, a parallel crisis team had been assembled, one that most members of the government didn't even know existed. This was the Majestic 12, or MJ-12 as they were known in the deepest classified circles, a group established in 1947 following the Roswell incident to manage extraterrestrial contact scenarios. Elizabeth Hammond, the current MJ-12 director, had been preparing for this moment her entire career, though she had hoped it would never come. The files she had inherited upon taking the position 3 years earlier contained protocols and contingencies that read like science fiction, but now, watching the live feed of the craft descending toward the Pacific, those impossible scenarios had become terrifyingly real. Hammond knew things that even the president didn't know, secrets that had been kept for over 50 years, and one of those secrets was that humanity had encountered these visitors before. The archives Hammond had access to contained detailed reports of previous encounters, each one carefully hidden from public knowledge and most of government oversight. In 1952, a similar though much smaller craft had appeared over Washington, D.C., leading to a tense standoff that ended only when the object simply vanished, leaving behind electromagnetic anomalies that took weeks to dissipate. In 1976, the Tehran incident involved Iranian fighter jets attempting to intercept an unknown craft, only to have their weapons systems completely disabled when they approached. But the most relevant case was from 1991, when a craft matching the current one's electromagnetic signature had been detected deep beneath Arctic ice. That craft had remained dormant, apparently abandoned, and had been the subject of intensive study at a black site in Alaska. The technology recovered from that site had led to breakthroughs in materials science and quantum computing, advances that had been carefully fed into the civilian sector over decades to avoid arousing suspicion. Hammond placed an encrypted call to Dr. Marcus Webb, who was one of the few scientists cleared to know about the Arctic discovery. "Marcus, I need you to compare the current signatures with the Alaska artifact. Are we dealing with the same civilization?" Webb's response came after a pause that seemed to last forever. "Elizabeth, it's not just the same civilization. The quantum resonance patterns are identical. This could be the same craft, or at least part of the same fleet, but there's something else. The patterns show signs of active scanning. It's looking for something, searching the ocean floor methodically." Hammond felt a chill run down her spine. If the craft was searching for something specific, it meant they had been here before, had left something behind, and now had returned to reclaim it. Back in the Pentagon's war room, Tensions were escalating by the hour. Admiral Jonathan Pike, commander of the Pacific Fleet, was advocating for immediate action. Every minute we wait, we lose strategic advantage. If this thing has hostile intent, we're giving it time to prepare, to potentially deploy whatever forces it carries. We have submarines in position. We have the element of surprise. We need to act now. But General Bradley was more cautious, his years of military experience telling him that acting without understanding the enemy's capabilities was a recipe for disaster. Admiral, we don't even know if our weapons will be effective. The electromagnetic interference alone could cause our missiles to go off course. We could be launching a nuclear attack that fails to destroy the target, but succeeds in irradiating half the Pacific. The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from Captain Chen, still maintaining position with her squadron 5 miles from the craft. Command, we're observing new activity. The craft is deploying something. Multiple objects approximately 50 meters in diameter each. They're descending independently toward the ocean surface at high speed. The radar confirmed it. 12 smaller objects had separated from the main craft and were descending rapidly, reaching the ocean surface in less than 30 seconds and disappearing beneath the waves. Hydrophones in the area immediately detected them moving at impossible speeds underwater, descending directly toward the deepest part of the Mariana Trench. President Walker had been awake for 24 hours straight, the weight of the decision before him etched in the lines on his face. He turned to his advisors, his voice heavy with the burden of command. If we launch a nuclear strike and fail to destroy it, we've not only revealed our hostile intent, but also our impotence. If we don't act, and this is an invasion, history will remember us as the administration that failed to defend humanity. I need options beyond the nuclear response. Dr. Williams had been working on alternative approaches with a team of scientists and strategic planners. Mr. President, we've identified 3 possible non-nuclear responses. First, we could attempt an electromagnetic pulse attack using conventional weapons, trying to disable their systems without destroying the craft. Second, we could attempt to communicate using the patterns they're emitting, essentially trying to speak their language. Third, we could evacuate the Pacific coast and wait to see what their intentions are once they reach the ocean floor. Each option carried enormous risk. An EMP attack might be interpreted as aggression, triggering a response they weren't prepared for. Attempting communication could reveal the extent of human technology and knowledge, potentially making Earth a more attractive target. An evacuation would cause mass panic and economic collapse without any guarantee of safety. As they debated, new intelligence arrived that changed everything. Satellite imagery showed that the 12 objects that had entered the ocean were converging on a specific point in the Mariana Trench, a location that matched coordinates from a classified Navy operation in 1968, when the USS Scorpion had been lost, under mysterious circumstances. The official story was that the submarine had suffered a mechanical failure, but the classified files told a different story of an encounter with something on the ocean floor, something that had caused the submarine to implode in a pattern consistent with exposure to gravitational anomalies. Dr. Hammond, participating via secure video link from Mount Weather, decided it was time to reveal what MJ-12 knew. Mr. President, there's information you need to have. In 1968, the USS Scorpion discovered an artifact on the floor of the Mariana Trench. The submarine was lost attempting to investigate it, but not before transmitting data about an object that appeared to be technological in origin, predating any human presence in the area by thousands, possibly millions of years. We believe the craft above us now is here to retrieve that artifact. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. If true, it meant that Earth had been visited before, that evidence of extraterrestrial presence had been sitting on the ocean floor for millennia, and that humanity had stumbled upon it by accident. The president's response was immediate and decisive. If they're here to retrieve something that belongs to them, then destroying them would be not just wrong but catastrophically stupid. Cancel the nuclear option. I want all efforts focused on establishing communication and understanding their intentions. General Bradley protested vigorously. Sir, with all due respect, we're making assumptions based on speculation. We don't know what this artifact is or what they intend to do with it. It could be a weapon, a device that could destroy our planet. But the president held firm. General, if they have the technology to travel here, to build craft of this size, they could destroy us whenever they chose. The fact that they haven't suggests they have another purpose. We're going to find out what that is. At 10:00 a.m. Pacific time, the main craft had descended to 30,000 feet, now visible to the naked eye from ships in the area. The Navy had established a 50-mile exclusion zone, but keeping civilian vessels away was becoming increasingly difficult. News helicopters were attempting to approach, only to have their engines fail when they got within 10 miles of the craft. It seemed to have a defensive field that disabled electronic systems that got too close, but didn't harm the occupants, suggesting a level of precision and control that was both reassuring and terrifying. The smaller objects had reached the trench floor and were now stationary, arranged in a perfect circle around something that sonar couldn't quite identify, something that seemed to bend sound waves around it just as the craft above bent light. Webb had been analyzing the electromagnetic patterns and had made a breakthrough. The pulses weren't random. They followed a mathematical sequence based on prime numbers, but with variations that suggested they were conveying information. Working with a team of linguists and cryptographers, he had begun to decode what might be a message. The initial translation was fragmentary but chilling. It seemed to be repeating coordinates not just of the Mariana Trench, but of 12 other locations around the globe, places where similar artifacts might be hidden. The implications were staggering. Earth hadn't just been visited, it had been seeded with technology, left behind for reasons unknown, and now the owners had come to reclaim their property. As noon approached, something unprecedented happened. Every television, radio, and internet-connected device within 1,000 miles of the craft suddenly activated, displaying the same message in every human language simultaneously. The message was simple but profound, appearing as text on screens and spoken in a synthesized but oddly soothing voice through speakers. We mean no harm. We come to retrieve what was left behind. Your species was not meant to find it yet. Please do not interfere. We will depart when our task is complete. The message repeated 3 times, then stopped, leaving billions of people around the world stunned and terrified. The secret was out. Humanity was not alone, and the visitors had just announced themselves to everyone on Earth. The global announcement changed everything in an instant. Within minutes of the message broadcasting across every device, the carefully maintained government narrative crumbled like sand. Streets in major cities filled with people staring at the sky, some in wonder, others in terror. Religious leaders called emergency gatherings. Scientists demanded access to data, and financial markets crashed spectacularly before trading was suspended worldwide. In the Pentagon war room, the president and his advisors watched civilization teeter on the edge of chaos, while a 3-kilometer-wide alien craft continued its methodical descent toward the Pacific Ocean. The time for secrecy had passed, and with it any chance of controlling how humanity would respond to first contact. Dr. Hammond coordinated with international leaders through encrypted channels that had been established decades ago for exactly this scenario. The British Prime Minister, the Russian President, the Chinese Premier, all had known that this day might come, though none had truly believed it would happen in their lifetime. Each nation had its own version of MJ-12, its own collection of artifacts and encounters that had been hidden from public view. Now, with the visitors openly communicating, those secrets seemed pointless. The French president was the first to break protocol, ordering the release of classified UFO files that dated back to the 1950s. Within hours, other nations followed suit, creating an avalanche of disclosure that confirmed what many had long suspected. Governments had known about extraterrestrial visits for generations, and had hidden the truth from their citizens. Captain Sarah Chen maintained her position observing the craft, her F-22's instruments recording everything despite the electromagnetic interference. At 2:00 p.m., she witnessed something that would be captured on film and become one of the most analyzed pieces of footage in human history. A section of the craft's surface became transparent, revealing the interior for approximately 30 seconds. What she saw defied easy description. The inside appeared to be larger than the outside, with multiple levels that seemed to exist in different dimensions simultaneously. Beings moved within, tall and slender, perhaps 8 feet in height, with elongated limbs, and heads that seemed too large for their bodies. They moved with a fluid grace that suggested lower gravity or perhaps a different relationship with physics altogether. But what struck Chen most was their apparent calmness. They moved with purpose, but without urgency, like workers performing a routine task they had done many times before. The 12 smaller craft that had descended to the ocean floor began their operation in earnest. Sonar readings from U.S. Navy submarines, monitoring the area, showed them creating a perfect geometric pattern around a specific coordinate in the Challenger Deep, the deepest point in the Mariana Trench. The water itself began to glow with a soft blue light visible even from the surface. 7 miles above, marine biologists monitoring deep-sea cameras recorded something extraordinary. Every form of sea life, from the smallest microorganisms to giant squid, was fleeing the area in a mass exodus unlike anything ever observed. It wasn't panic, it was more like an orchestrated evacuation, as if every living thing in the ocean had received the same instruction to leave. Dr. Webb's team had made significant progress in decoding the electromagnetic transmission. The patterns contained not just location data, but historical records, a timeline of visits that stretched back 450,000 years. According to the decoded information, Earth had been monitored and periodically visited by multiple extraterrestrial civilizations. The artifacts left behind were described as markers or beacons, designed to activate when humanity reached certain technological milestones. The one in the Mariana Trench had been triggered accidentally when the USS Scorpion's nuclear reactor had come too close, sending a signal that humanity had achieved atomic power. The visitors had come not to invade, but to remove the markers before humanity could fully discover and potentially misuse technology. It wasn't ready to understand. President Walker convened an emergency session with world leaders via secure video conference. The Chinese premier spoke first, his words carefully chosen. If these beings have been watching us for hundreds of thousands of years, they have had countless opportunities to conquer or destroy us. The fact that they haven't suggests their intentions are not hostile. However, the technology they're retrieving could be invaluable to human advancement. Should we not attempt to negotiate for access to even a portion of it? The Russian president disagreed vehemently. We don't negotiate from a position of weakness. They announced themselves to the world without permission, causing global panic. They're taking something from our planet without asking. This is theft, regardless of who placed it there originally. The debate was interrupted by a new development. The craft had stopped descending at exactly 20,000 feet, and was now hovering perfectly still. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot down from its center, striking the ocean surface directly above where the smaller craft were working. The beam was unlike anything human science could explain. It didn't burn or explode. Instead, it seemed to part the water itself, creating a perfect cylinder of air that extended from the craft all the way to the ocean floor. Within this impossible column, the 12 smaller craft rose, carrying something between them, something that hurt to look at directly, as if human eyes couldn't quite process its geometry. It was roughly spherical but seemed to have more dimensions than 3, constantly shifting and folding in on itself while maintaining its basic shape. The object they were retrieving was massive, perhaps 200 meters in diameter, and as it rose through the column of air, every piece of electronic equipment within 500 miles began to malfunction, not failing completely but glitching, displaying impossible readouts, receiving transmissions from the future and the past simultaneously. Radio operators reported hearing conversations that hadn't happened yet, while others picked up distress calls from ships that had sunk decades ago. Time itself seemed to be fluctuating around the ascending artifact, creating temporal anomalies that physicists would spend decades trying to understand. In submarines monitoring the event, crew members reported experiencing memories that weren't their own, glimpses of other times and places, other versions of Earth where history had unfolded differently. Doc Hammond watched the retrieval from Mount Weather, her team of scientists recording every possible piece of data. One of her physicists, Dr. Kumar, made an observation that chilled everyone in the room. The energy readings we're getting, They match theoretical models for a device that could manipulate spacetime on a massive scale. If this thing is what I think it is, it's not just a beacon or marker. It's a gateway, a portal generator that could connect Earth to anywhere in the universe, instantaneously. And there are supposedly 12 more of these devices hidden around our planet. The implications were staggering. If such devices existed and could be activated, Earth could become a hub in some vast interstellar network. But it could also become vulnerable to visits from civilizations far less benign than the current visitors. As the artifact reached 10,000 feet below the main craft, still ascending through the impossible column of air, something unexpected happened. The president received a direct communication, not through normal channels but appearing as text on his personal secure terminal, a system that wasn't connected to any network and should have been impossible to access. The message read, "Leader of the dominant nation state, we request direct communication. One representative will be received. Coordinates follow. You have 1 hour to decide." The coordinates provided were for a location in the Pacific, directly beneath where the craft hovered. It was an invitation, but also clearly a test. Would humanity send a representative to meet with beings from another world, not knowing if they would return? The debate that followed was fierce but brief. The opportunity was unprecedented, but the risk was enormous. Whoever went might not come back, or might come back changed. They needed someone with scientific knowledge, diplomatic skills, and the psychological fortitude to face the truly alien. General Bradley suggested sending a military officer, someone trained to gather intelligence and assess threats. Dr. Williams advocated for a scientist, someone who could understand and communicate about technology. But President Walker made a decision that surprised everyone. "I'll go myself. I'm the one who chose not to launch the nuclear strike. I'm the one responsible for how humanity responds to this moment. If we're going to send someone to speak for Earth, it should be someone with the authority to make decisions." The room erupted in protests. The Secret Service immediately declared it impossible to secure. The vice president insisted it was constitutional crisis waiting to happen, but Walker was adamant. "This is bigger than politics, bigger than any one nation. If these beings wanted to harm us, they wouldn't need to lure one person onto their ship. They could destroy us from where they are. This is an opportunity we may never have again. To learn who they are, why they've been watching us, and what humanity's place is in a universe that's suddenly become much larger." He turned to General Bradley. "General, prepare a helicopter. I want a small team, just essential personnel. We leave in 30 minutes. As preparations were made for the most important meeting in human history, the artifact continued its ascent. It had now cleared the ocean surface, and was approaching the main craft, the 12 smaller vessels arranging themselves around it in a protective formation. The temporal distortions were intensifying, causing people within the affected area to experience what they would later describe as temporal bleeding, seeing multiple versions of the same moment overlaid on top of each other. Some reported seeing versions of themselves making different choices, living different lives, all existing simultaneously for brief, disorienting moments. Reality itself seemed to be protesting the presence of the artifact, as if it was too powerful, too advanced to exist in normal spacetime without causing disruptions. Around the world, humanity held its breath. The news that President Walker would personally meet with the extraterrestrial visitors had leaked within minutes. Despite attempts to keep it secret, some called him humanity's greatest hero, others its greatest fool. Religious leaders proclaimed it the beginning of revelations, while scientists prepared to receive whatever knowledge might be shared. In the depths of the Pacific, submarines recorded strange sounds not from the alien craft but from the ocean floor itself, as if the removal of the artifact had awakened something that had been sleeping in the deep. Seismic sensors detected movement along fault lines that had been dormant for millions of years, and marine biologists reported that the mass exodus of sea life had reversed, with creatures now rushing back toward the Mariana Trench as if drawn by an irresistible force. The helicopter carrying President Walker lifted off from the USS Abraham Lincoln at 3:47 p.m. Pacific Time, its occupants aware they were flying toward a moment that would divide human history into before and after, Accompanying the president were Dr. Patricia Williams, his national security advisor and physicist, Lieutenant Colonel Maria Rodriguez, a linguistic specialist who had worked on decoding the alien transmissions, and surprisingly, Dr. Marcus Webb, who had been flown in specifically at Walker's request. The Secret Service had protested vehemently, but Walker had overruled them, stating simply that traditional security protocols were meaningless when dealing with fiends who could appear anywhere on Earth without warning. As the helicopter approached the coordinates, the massive craft above them began to pulse with a soft blue light, and a circular opening appeared in its underside, revealing what looked like a hangar bay filled with the same impossible geometry Chen had glimpsed earlier. The pilot's instruments went dead the moment they passed beneath the craft, but instead of falling, the helicopter was caught in some kind of field that guided it upward smoothly and steadily. Through the windows they could see the walls of the opening passing by, surfaces that seemed to be made of a material that was simultaneously metallic and organic, covered in patterns that shifted and moved like living things. Dr. Webb was recording everything on a specially hardened camera, one of the few devices still functioning in the electromagnetic field. "The surface appears to be composed of programmable matter," he whispered into his recorder, "capable of changing its molecular structure in response to external stimuli. This is centuries, perhaps millennia beyond our current technology." The helicopter settled onto a platform inside the craft, with barely a whisper of contact, and immediately the opening below them sealed, becoming indistinguishable from the rest of the hull. The air inside was breathable but had a strange quality to it, slightly thicker than Earth normal, with a faint ozone smell that made their sinuses tingle. As they exited the helicopter, President Walker noticed that gravity felt different here, not lighter or heavier but somehow more optional, as if it was a suggestion rather than a law. The hangar around them was vast, extending in directions that seemed to violate three-dimensional space, with other craft visible in the distance that defied easy categorization. Some appeared to be made of pure energy, others seemed to phase in and out of existence, and at least one appeared to be biological, breathing slowly like a sleeping creature. A figure approached them from the far side of the hangar, moving with a fluid grace Chen had observed. As it drew closer, they could see it in detail for the first time. The being stood perhaps 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs that had an extra joint, allowing for movements that would be impossible for human. Skin was pale gray with a faint iridescent quality, shifting between different hues depending on the angle of view. The head was indeed larger than human proportions would suggest, with eyes that were completely black but somehow conveyed depth and intelligence. It wore no clothing but seemed to be covered in a second skin that might have been technology, or might have been part of its biology. When it spoke, the words came not from its mouth but from the air around them, in perfect English but with harmonics that suggested it was speaking in multiple languages simultaneously. "President Thomas Walker," the being said, and there was something in the way it pronounced his name that suggested it knew far more about him than just his title. "I am what you would call an ambassador, though the concept translates poorly. My designation would be unpronounceable in your language, but you may call me Sentinel, as that approximates my function. We apologize for the distress our arrival has caused your species. It was necessary to act quickly once we detected that the beacon had been activated." Walker found his voice, though speaking to an alien being inside their craft 20,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean seemed surreal beyond description. "Sentinel, on behalf of humanity, I need to understand your intentions. Your message said, you're here to retrieve what was left behind. What exactly are these artifacts, and why were they placed on our planet?" Sentinel gestured, and the air in front of them solidified into a three-dimensional display showing Earth as it was 450,000 years ago. The continents in different positions, the ice caps larger, the atmosphere visibly different. Your planet was selected as one of 12,000 worlds to receive monitoring stations. We represent a coalition of species that you would call the Watchers, though again the translation is imperfect. Our purpose is to identify worlds that develop sentient life and monitor their progress toward technological maturity. The devices we placed were meant to remain dormant until your species achieved certain milestones. Nuclear fission was one such milestone. The accident with your submarine triggered the beacon prematurely, alerting us that you had achieved atomic power, but had not yet developed the wisdom to properly contain it. Dr. Williams interjected with a question that had been burning in her mind since the first detection. You say you're a coalition. How many species are we talking about? And how long have you been watching Earth? The display shifted, showing a galaxy teeming with points of light, each one representing a sentient species. There were thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. The Watchers consist of 43 species that have achieved what you would call Type 3 civilization status, capable of harnessing the energy of entire galaxies. We have been monitoring your planet since the first signs of complex life appear. We have watched your species evolve, develop language, create civilizations, and now stand on the precipice of becoming a spacefaring race. The decision before us is whether humanity is ready to know of our existence and eventually join the galactic community, or whether you need more time to mature. Walker felt the weight of representation settling on his shoulders like a physical force. And what criteria do you use to make that determination? What would make humanity ready in your eyes? Sentinel's expression, if it could be called that, seemed to shift to something that might have been compassion or might have been pity. Your species shows remarkable potential, but also remarkable destructiveness. You have split the atom, but also used it to destroy your own cities. You have decoded the genome, but also created weapons of biological warfare. You reach for the stars but poison the very planet that gave you life. The artifact we are retrieving is a gateway device, capable of opening wormholes to any point in the universe. In your current state, with your tribal conflicts and tendency toward violence, giving you access to such technology would be catastrophic, not just for Earth, but for countless other worlds. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, who had been silent until now, asked a crucial question. You said there are 12 more of these devices on Earth. Are you planning to retrieve all of them? The display changed again, showing the locations of the other artifacts. Several were in places that made Walker's blood run cold. Directly beneath major cities, under the Antarctic ice sheet, one appeared to be inside the moon. We will retrieve only the one that has been activated. The others will remain dormant, unless your species discovers them naturally, which would indicate you have achieved a necessary technological sophistication to handle them safely. Consider it a test, one that will take your species perhaps another 1,000 years to pass, if you survive that long. The casual mention of humanity's potential extinction sent a chill through the group. Dr. Webb couldn't contain his scientific curiosity any longer. The technology you possess, the ability to manipulate gravity, to travel faster than light, to phase between dimensions, could you share even a fraction of it? It could solve our energy crisis, end scarcity, unite our species in common purpose. Sentinel moved closer to Webb, studying him with those impossibly deep black eyes. Dr. Marcus Webb, you have spent your life studying fragments of our technology, trying to understand principles that your science has not yet discovered. Would you give a child the keys to a fusion reactor? Would you hand primitive tribes weapons that could destroy continents? The knowledge you seek must be earned through your own discovery, your own growth. We learned this lesson eons ago when a younger species was given technology too advanced for their wisdom. They destroyed not just themselves but 3 other inhabited worlds before they could be stopped. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Humanity wasn't just being judged on its own merits but against the backdrop of galactic history, where other species had been tested and failed catastrophically. Walker pressed on with the negotiation he had come to attempt. If you take this artifact and leave, what happens to humanity? Do we continue to be watched? Will you return? Sentinel gestured again, and the display showed Earth surrounded by a faint grid of light. The monitoring will continue, but from a distance. We will not interfere with your development unless you pose a threat to other worlds. The other beacons will remain, dormant and hidden. If your species survives its current challenges, if you overcome your divisions and mature as a civilization, you will eventually find that. When you can activate them safely, when you understand their purpose and implications, that will be the sign that humanity is ready to join the galactic community. Dr. Williams had been making calculations in her head since the conversation began. You mentioned 43 species in your coalition. That means there are thousands of others who aren't part of it. What about them? Are there hostile civilizations we should be aware of? The question seemed to cause Sentinel to pause, the first sign of hesitation they had seen. The universe contains all possibilities, Dr. Williams. There are species that would see your world as a resource to be exploited, others that would view your existence as an affront to their beliefs. The Watchers maintain a protective boundary around developing worlds, but that protection is not absolute. The longer your species takes to mature, the greater the chance that you will encounter those who wish you harm before you are ready to defend yourselves. This is another reason why the activated beacon must be removed. It broadcasts your location across dimensions that you cannot yet perceive. Suddenly, alarms began sounding throughout the craft, not harsh mechanical sounds, but organic warnings, like the craft itself was expressing distress. Sentinel's demeanor changed instantly from calm educator to alert guardian. We are detecting an anomaly. The removal of the artifact has triggered something unexpected. The display shifted to show the ocean floor where the device had been retrieved. A massive fissure had opened in the seabed, and something was emerging from it, something that the sensors couldn't properly identify. It appeared as a void in the readings, an absence of data rather than presence, growing larger with each passing second. This is not possible, Sentinel said, and the fact that a being representing a Type 3 civilization sounded concerned sent Walker's heart racing. There should be nothing beneath the beacon. The location was chosen specifically because it was geologically stable and biologically empty. The craft shuddered. Something Walker wouldn't have thought possible for a vessel of its size and apparent technological sophistication. Through the display, they could see that whatever was emerging from the fissure was rising rapidly through the water, displacing millions of tons of ocean in a massive upheaval that would trigger tsunamis across the Pacific. But more disturbing was the effect it was having on the alien craft itself. Systems that had been functioning perfectly were beginning to fail. Lights flickering, gravity fluctuating, the very air seeming to thin. Sentinel turned to the humans with urgency that transcended species. You must return to your vessel immediately. What emerges is beyond our calculations, possibly beyond our ability to contain. Your planet's history may be more complex than we understood. As they rushed back toward the helicopter, Walker shouted over the increasingly chaotic sounds filling the craft. What is that then? What was hidden beneath your beacon? Sentinel's response came just as they reached their vehicle, and it was perhaps the most terrifying thing they could have heard from an advanced alien being. We don't know. But it's ancient, older than our records, older than the Watchers themselves. And it's angry. The helicopter plummeted from the alien craft's hangar as gravity reasserted itself with violent suddenness. The pilot fighting desperately to regain control as they fell toward the churning Pacific below. Through the windows, President Walker and his team watched the massive alien vessel beginning to rise rapidly, its surface flickering between visible and invisible as if struggling to maintain cohesion in their dimension. The artifact they had retrieved, that impossible sphere of twisted space-time, was pulsing with an intense white light that hurt to look at directly, and around it the 12 smaller craft were arranging themselves in what appeared to be a defensive formation, but defensive against what had been sleeping beneath the beacon for potentially millions of years, was a question that sent ice through Walker's veins. The ocean below them was in chaos. Where once there had been relatively calm seas, now massive whirlpools had formed, each one hundreds of meters across, spiraling down into darkness. The water itself had turned black, not from depth or shadow, but from something rising from below, something that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. As their helicopter struggled to gain altitude and distance, Dr. Webb pressed his face against the window, his scientific mind trying to process what he was seeing. Mr. President, the electromagnetic readings are off the charts. Whatever that thing is, it's generating a field that's interfering with the fundamental forces. It's not just disrupting technology, it's disrupting physics itself. From the USS Abraham Lincoln, Admiral Pike watched his instruments go haywire as every system on the carrier began failing simultaneously. The nuclear reactors scrambled, backup power failed, and even mechanical systems that should have been immune to electromagnetic interference stopped working. Through binoculars, He could see something breaking the ocean surface 5 miles from his position, and what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. It wasn't a craft or a creature in any conventional sense. It was more like a piece of space that didn't belong. A three-dimensional shadow that moved through the water without displacing it, grew without expanding, and seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. The thing was massive, easily dwarfing the alien craft above it, and it rose from the ocean with a deliberate slowness that suggested not weakness but contempt for the physical laws governing this reality. In the Pentagon war room, now running on emergency power after the electromagnetic pulse had knocked out the main grid, General Bradley and the remaining Joint Chiefs watched satellite feeds that made no sense. The entity rising from the Pacific appeared different in each image, as if it was constantly shifting between states or as if each sensor was seeing a different aspect of something that existed in more dimensions than humans could perceive. The only consistency was its apparent hostility toward the alien craft. Tendrils of darkness. If darkness could be said to have substance, reached upward toward the Watcher's vessel, and where they made contact, pieces of the alien ship simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but erased, leaving perfect voids in the hull. Doc Hammond at Mount Weather was frantically searching through the deepest classified archives, files that hadn't been accessed since they were created. She found what she was looking for in a document dated 1908, a report from the Tunguska event in Siberia. The official story was a meteorite explosion, but the classified report told a different tale. Witnesses had described seeing something dark and impossible rising from the impact site before a massive explosion flattened 2,000 square kilometers of forest. The report's author, a Russian scientist named Volkov, had theorized that something had been buried deep in the earth, something that had been awakened by the impact and had been forced back down by the explosion. His final notes, written days before his mysterious disappearance, mentioned ancient texts that spoke of the prisoners beneath, entities that had been trapped in the earth, long before any current civilization, imprisoned by beings Volkov could only describe as the first one. President Walker's helicopter had managed to reach the carrier, landing hard on a deck that was tilting as the ship struggled without power in increasingly violent seas. As he rushed to the emergency command center, he could hear Sentinel's voice coming through on a device Dr. Webb had somehow kept functional. The alien's usual calm was completely gone, replaced by something that sounded very much like fear. President Walker, you must understand, this entity is not of your world or ours. It predates the Watchers, predates the Coalition, predates most life in this galaxy. We have records of such beings, legends really, from the oldest species in our alliance. They were called the Primordials, entities from the universe's first iteration, before the last cosmic collapse and rebirth. They should not exist in this reality. But somehow, some were trapped, imprisoned in the deep places of young worlds by civilizations we know nothing about. The battle, if it could be called that, was unlike anything human military doctrine had prepared for. The Watcher's craft was using weapons that bent space itself, creating pockets of compressed gravity that should have crushed anything they touched. But the primordial entity seemed to absorb these attacks, growing larger and more substantial with each assault. It retaliated with waves of pure entropy, causing sections of the alien craft to age millions of years in seconds, metal corroding to dust, energy dissipating into heat, death. The smaller alien vessels darted around the entity, firing beams of coherent light that seemed to cut through dimensions. But for every wound they inflicted, the thing sprouted new appendages, new forms, as if it was learning from each attack and evolving counters in real time. Dr. Williams, monitoring the situation from the carrier's emergency command center, made a terrifying observation. Mr. President, the entity isn't just fighting the aliens, it's spreading. We're detecting similar electromagnetic anomalies at 3 other locations around the Pacific Rim. Whatever this thing is, it's either multiplying or it was never a single entity to begin with. The implications were catastrophic. If there were multiple primordials awakening, Earth was facing an extinction-level threat that made nuclear war look like a minor inconvenience. Cities along the Pacific coast were already reporting massive earthquakes, as the entity's emergence destabilized tectonic plates. Tokyo, Los Angeles, Sydney, all were experiencing tremors that suggested something massive moving beneath the Earth's crust. In desperation, President Walker made a decision that went against every protocol. Get me a direct line to Moscow, Beijing, London, and Paris. Full disclosure, no filters. If we're facing a global extinction event, the entire world needs to know. Within minutes, he was on a conference call with world leaders, explaining the situation while video feeds showed the continuing battle above the Pacific. The Chinese premier was the first to respond. We have detected similar anomalies in the South China Sea. Our deepest drilling project in the Mariana Trench reported encountering a void 2 months ago, something our instruments couldn't penetrate. We sealed it, but now seismic activity suggests something is breaking through from below. Sentinel's voice cut through the discussion, now broadcasting on all emergency frequencies simultaneously. Leaders of Earth, the situation has escalated beyond our projections. The primordial entities were imprisoned on your world by the first makers, beings that predate even our oldest records. We believed the prisons were permanent, but the activation of our beacon has somehow weakened the containment. We are transmitting all data we have on these entities to your systems now. You must prepare your species for a threat that transcends nations, transcends your current understanding of conflict. The primordials do not seek conquest or resources. They seek to remake reality itself to match their nature, to return the universe to the chaos that existed before order was imposed. The data transmission that followed overwhelmed every computer system that received it. Exabytes of information flowed in seconds, containing scientific principles that wouldn't be discovered by humanity for millennia, weapons specifications that required elements that didn't exist on Earth, and most disturbingly records of other worlds that had faced primordial emergence. None had survived intact. Some had been transformed into realms where physics worked differently, where conscious thought became physical reality, where time flowed backward and causality was meaningless. Others had simply ceased, erased from existence so thoroughly that only gravitational anomalies marked where they had once been. As the sun set over the Pacific, casting an eerie orange glow over the battle between incomprehensible forces, humanity faced its darkest hour. The alien craft, despite its advanced technology, was losing. Large sections had been erased or corrupted by the primordials' attacks, and it was beginning to list, losing altitude gradually. The artifact they had retrieved was now glowing so brightly it could be seen from the International Space Station, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat or perhaps a countdown. Dr. Webb, studying the transmitted data, suddenly went pale. Mr. President, according to this, the artifact isn't just a gateway, it's a key specifically designed to reinforce the primordial prisons. The aliens weren't just retrieving it, they were trying to prevent it from being damaged or destroyed. If it fails, every prison on Earth could open simultaneously. General Bradley, who had been advocating for military action throughout the crisis, now found himself in the surreal position of asking, how do we help the aliens? How does the United States military assist a Type 3 civilization in fighting an entity from before the universe began? It was a question that would have seemed like madness just hours ago, but now represented humanity's only hope for survival. The nuclear option, which had been prepared and then cancelled, suddenly seemed not like an attack, but a potential aid. If human nuclear weapons could provide even a distraction, even a moment's respite for the Watchers to reactivate the artifact's containment properties, it might be worth the attempt. President Walker turned to his advisors, his face grave with the weight of the decision before him. We're going to do something unprecedented in human history. We're going to launch a coordinated nuclear strike, not against the aliens, but in cooperation with them, against a threat that predates our entire existence. General Bradley, contact all nuclear-capable nations. We need everything we have, launch simultaneously, targeted at the primordial entities, and pray that our primitive weapons can make even the slightest difference against something that shouldn't exist in our reality. The coordination of a global nuclear strike in cooperation with an alien civilization against entities from before the universe began required a level of international cooperation that had never been achieved in human history. Within 30 minutes of President Walker's decision, secure communications linked command centers in Washington, Moscow, Beijing, London, Paris, Tel Aviv, New Delhi, and Islamabad. For the first time, former enemies shared their most closely guarded nuclear protocols, targeting systems and arsenal capabilities. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that humanity's weapons of mutual destruction had become instruments of mutual survival. General Bradley coordinated with his counterparts worldwide while Sentinel, speaking through increasingly distorted communications as the Watcher's craft sustained more damage, provided targeting data that human systems could barely process. The primordial entity had now fully emerged from the Pacific, revealing a form that surveillance equipment struggled to capture coherently. Every observer saw something different, their brains trying desperately to make sense of something that existed outside normal spacetime. To some, it appeared as a massive tower of black glass that reflected things that weren't there. To others, it was a writhing mass of geometric impossibilities, angles that didn't add up, surfaces that were simultaneously inside and outside. The one consistency was its effect on reality around it. Water near the entity didn't behave like water anymore, sometimes flowing upward, sometimes becoming solid without freezing, sometimes simply ceasing to exist. The air itself was breaking down, creating pockets of vacuum and areas of impossibly dense atmosphere that crushed anything that entered them. Dr. Hammond's team at Mount Weather had decoded more of the data transmitted by the Watchers, and what they found changed everything they thought they knew about Earth's history. The planet had been a prison world for millions of years, chosen specifically because of its distance from galactic civilization and its robust ecosystem that could survive and adapt to almost anything. The first makers, whoever or whatever they were, had imprisoned at least 17 primordial entities in the Earth's mantle and core, using technology that turned the planet's own magnetic field and geological processes into prison bars. The artifacts the Watchers had placed weren't just monitoring devices, they were reinforcement mechanisms, designed to strengthen the prisons if they ever began to weaken. But humanity's nuclear testing, deep drilling projects, and electromagnetic experiments had been unknowingly weakening these prisons for decades. In the Pacific, the Watcher's main craft was failing rapidly. Half of it had been erased or corrupted by the Primordial's attacks, and the remaining sections were flickering between dimensions, unable to maintain stable existence in normal space. The 12 smaller craft had formed a protective sphere around the retrieved artifact, which was now pulsing with such intensity that it was affecting weather patterns for thousands of miles. Storm systems were forming and dissipating in seconds, lightning struck upward from the ocean to the sky, and the aurora borealis appeared over the equator, something that should have been physically impossible. Sentinel's last clear communication was a set of coordinates and a simple message that chilled everyone who heard it. When we fall, you must deliver the artifact to these coordinates. It is the only way to reseal the prisons. We have failed. Humanity must not. The coordinates were for a location in Antarctica, specifically a point 2 miles beneath the ice sheet, where satellite imagery had recently detected a massive geometric structure that shouldn't exist. It had been dismissed as a sensor error, but now, it was clear it was another piece of the first Maker's prison system, possibly a control center that could reactivate the containment if the artifact could be delivered to it. The problem was that the Watcher's craft was the only thing keeping the primordial entity focused on the Pacific. Once it fell, the entity would be free to spread across the planet, and moving the artifact would paint a massive target on whoever attempted it. At 11:47 p.m. Pacific time, the global nuclear strike commenced. From silos in Montana and Siberia, from submarines in every ocean, from mobile launchers and strategic bombers, over 3,000 nuclear warheads launched simultaneously. It was the arsenal that had held the world hostage for decades, now fired not in anger but in desperate hope. The missiles arced through the night sky, their trajectories calculated by alien mathematics to converge on 4 points where primordial entities were emerging. The sight of thousands of missile trails lighting up the night sky sent billions of people to their knees in prayer, not for victory but for survival. This wasn't war as humanity had ever conceived it. This was a species fighting against the unmaking of reality itself. The first warheads reached their targets at 12:03 a.m., and what happened next defied every model of nuclear warfare. Instead of the expected fireballs and mushroom clouds, the explosions seemed to tear holes in space itself. The nuclear reactions occurring within the primordial's distortion fields created cascading dimensional ruptures that even the Watchers hadn't predicted. For a brief moment, other realities became visible through the tears. Worlds where history had gone differently, where humanity had never evolved, where the Earth was a barren rock or a paradise untouched by industry. The primordial entity in the Pacific recoiled, not damaged in any conventional sense but momentarily disrupted, its form becoming less coherent as it dealt with thousands of simultaneous attacks across multiple dimensional planes. Webb, watching from the carrier's observation deck, suddenly understood what was happening. The nuclear reactions aren't hurting it directly, but they're creating quantum uncertainty on a massive scale. The entity exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and the explosions are forcing it to collapse into fewer states, making it more vulnerable to the Watcher's weapons. He grabbed a communication device and broadcast on all frequencies. All units maintain continuous bombardment. Don't give it time to adapt or recover. Every second of disruption gives the aliens more time to activate the artifact's containment protocols. The battle took on a surreal quality as human nuclear weapons, alien energy beams and primordial reality distortions created a maelstrom of impossible events above the Pacific. Time flowed differently in different areas, with some regions experiencing hours while others experienced seconds. A submarine that fired its missiles found itself arriving at its destination before it had left, creating a paradox that caused it to exist in two places simultaneously, until the temporal field collapsed. Fighter jets reported seeing their own future selves flying past them, warning them of dangers that hadn't happened yet. The laws of physics weren't just being broken, they were being rewritten moment by moment. In the midst of this chaos, the Watcher's craft finally succumbed, with a sound that was felt rather than heard, a vibration that resonated in the bones of every living thing on Earth. The massive vessel began to implode, but it wasn't a simple collapse. The craft seemed to be folding in on itself, each fold taking it further out of normal space, until with a final pulse of light that was visible from Mars, it vanished. The 12 smaller craft and the artifact it protected were left floating in the air, maintained by some kind of automated system but clearly vulnerable. The primordial entity, no longer constrained by battle with the Watchers, turned its full attention to the artifact, understanding instinctively that it was the key to its continued imprisonment. President Walker made the hardest decision of his life in that moment. General Bradley, prepare Operation Longshot. We're going to retrieve that artifact and get it to Antarctica, whatever the cost. Operation Longshot had been a contingency plan developed in the past hour. A desperate scheme that involved using every available military aircraft to create a relay system across the Pacific and over Antarctica, with the artifact being passed from one aircraft to another as each one was inevitably destroyed or corrupted by the primordial's influence. It was a suicide mission on a massive scale, but it was the only option they had. Bradley's response was immediate and grim. Understood, Mr. President. God help us all. The first wave of aircraft launched from carriers and air bases across the Pacific, a mixture of fighters, bombers, and transport planes from a dozen nations. Their mission was simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. Get close enough to the artifact to secure it, then race toward Antarctica before the primordial entity could stop them. As they approached the floating artifact, still protected by the 12 alien drone craft, something unexpected happened. The drones, instead of attacking the human aircraft, began transmitting instructions in perfect English, Russian, Chinese, and every other human language simultaneously. They were teaching humanity how to handle the artifact, how to transport it without being destroyed by its energies, and most importantly, how to activate it once it reached the Antarctic coordinate. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Rodriguez, who had been with the president during the meeting with Sentinel, was aboard the lead aircraft, a specially modified C-17 Globemaster. As they approached the artifact, she could feel it pulling at her mind, showing her visions of other times and places, other versions of Earth, where the primordials had never been imprisoned. In some visions, the planet was a paradise of crystalline cities and flying beings of pure light. In others, it was a hellscape where the laws of physics changed daily and humanity had never evolved past single-celled organisms. The message was clear. Reality itself was at stake, and the next few hours would determine which version of Earth would exist tomorrow. The primordial entity attacked. Just as the first aircraft reached the artifact, tendrils of distorted space lashed out, aging the lead fighter to rust in seconds, turning another into a flock of birds that scattered in all directions, and simply erasing a third from existence so thoroughly that no one could remember it had ever been there. But humanity had learned from watching the Watchers fight. The pilots flew erratically, never maintaining the same course for more than a few seconds, making themselves harder to target. They used their nuclear weapons not as bombs but as dimensional disruptors, creating pockets of uncertainty that the entity had to navigate around. It was David versus Goliath. If David had nuclear stones and Goliath was a god from before time began. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez C-17 managed to secure the artifact at 12:43 a.m. The alien drones creating a protective corridor through the Primordial's attacks, just long enough for the cargo bay to open and the retrieval team to bring it aboard. The moment the artifact entered the aircraft, everything changed. The interior of the plane became something else entirely. Surfaces rippling like water, instruments displaying information in languages that had never existed, crew members reporting that they could suddenly see through the hull as if it were transparent. Rodriguez felt the artifact's presence in her mind like a second consciousness, ancient beyond measure but somehow benevolent, trying to guide her thoughts toward the solution humanity needed. She understood now why the Watchers had been so careful with it. This wasn't just technology. It was something far more profound, a fragment of the original ordering force that had shaped the universe from primordial chaos. The flight toward Antarctica became a running battle that spanned half the globe. Every nation with military assets threw them into the relay, creating a chain of sacrifice that would later be remembered as humanity's finest and darkest hour. Japanese fighters from Okinawa took the first leg, passing the artifact to Australian F-18s over the Coral Sea. Each transfer was a moment of extreme vulnerability, the artifact having to be moved from one aircraft to another mid-flight using techniques hastily developed from the alien transmissions. During the second transfer, 3 planes were aged to dust by the Primordial's attacks, their pilots' last words recorded for posterity, speaking not of fear but of honor at being part of humanity's stand against the impossible. The primordial entity was learning, adapting to human tactics with terrifying speed. It began creating copies of itself, not physical duplicates but temporal echoes, versions from moments in the future or past that could attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Nuclear weapons became less effective as it developed immunity to dimensional disruption. Worse, it was beginning to affect human minds direct. Pilots reported hearing voices of loved ones telling them to turn back, seeing visions of peaceful futures if they would just drop the artifact into the ocean. 2 aircraft actually turned around, their crews overwhelmed by psychic pressure, before being talked back to their mission by ground control. The entity wasn't just fighting humanity's bodies and machines, it was attacking their will to resist. Dr. Webb, monitoring from the USS Abraham Lincoln, made a crucial discovery in the data the Watchers had transmitted. The primordial entities weren't evil in any sense humans could understand. They were simply incompatible with ordered reality. They came from a state of existence where all possibilities exist simultaneously, where causality was meaningless, where consciousness and matter were the same thing. To them, our universe of fixed laws and linear time was a prison, and they were trying to break free by breaking the prison itself. Understanding this didn't make them less dangerous, but it did suggest a possible solution. The artifact wasn't meant to destroy them but to convince them, to show them that ordered reality had its own beauty, its own value worth preserving. As the artifact crossed the equator aboard a Brazilian military transport, something extraordinary happened. The nuclear reactors on every submarine in the Pacific suddenly synchronized, pulsing in a rhythm that matched the artifact's energy signature. It wasn't malfunction but resonance, as if the artifact was teaching human technology how to harmonize with its frequency. Dr. Hammond at Mount Weather immediately understood the implications. It's creating a network, using our own infrastructure as an amplifier. Every nuclear reactor, every particle accelerator, every piece of sufficiently advanced technology is becoming part of a global containment grid. The artifact isn't just going to reseal the prisons, it's going to turn the entire planet into a prison cell, with humanity as the unwitting guards. President Walker, exhausted beyond measure, but still coordinating from the emergency command center, faced a terrible choice. If they succeeded in delivering the artifact to Antarctica, humanity would forever be the guardians of entities that should never be released. Earth would never be safe, never be free to expand into the cosmos, without risking the unleashing of primordials on an unsuspecting universe. But the alternative was the immediate unmaking of reality as they knew it. He turned to his advisors, seeing the same understanding in their eyes. We're not just fighting for today, we're accepting a responsibility that will last as long as our species exists. Every generation after us will have to maintain this vigil, knowing that beneath their feet sleeps the power to unmake everything. The Chinese premier's voice crackled over the communications system. Mr. President, our submarine fleet in the South China Sea is reporting something significant. The primordial entity there has stopped attacking and is moving toward your position. They're converging on the artifact. We estimate you have less than an hour before all 4 entities reach you. The implications were terrifying. If all 4 primordials focused on the artifact simultaneously, no force on Earth could protect it. The relay of aircraft was already stretched to its limits, with over 60 planes lost and hundreds of crew members dead or missing in dimensional rifts. They were running out of assets, out of options, and out of time. It was then that Sentinel's voice returned, weak and distorted but unmistakably alive. The alien had somehow survived the destruction of the main craft, though from the sound of the transmission barely humans. Humans of Earth. I am transmitting from a dimensional pocket that will collapse in moments. You have shown courage beyond what we expected. The artifact has been learning from you, from your nuclear technology, from your determination. It can be activated early before reaching Antarctica, but at great cost. Whoever triggers it will be caught in the temporal backlash, experiencing every moment of the primordial's imprisonment simultaneously. Millions of years compressed into seconds. It will destroy any consciousness that attempts it, but it will work. Rodriguez heard this transmission in the C-17, now approaching the Antarctic coast, with 2 primordial entities in pursuit, and 2 more approaching from the north. She looked at the artifact, floating in the center of the cargo bay, pulsing with light that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. She thought of her family, her daughter who had just started college, her husband who had begged her not to volunteer for this mission. Then she of what would happen to them if the primordials succeeded in unmaking reality. The decision was no decision at all. She turned to her crew, seeing the same resolution in their eyes. Gentlemen, it's been an honor. Transmit our position and situation to command. Tell them we're activating the artifact now. The process was surprisingly simple. Following the instructions the alien drones had provided, Rodriguez placed her hands on the artifact's surface, feeling it burn and freeze simultaneously. Her mind exploded with visions, memories that weren't hers, experiences of beings that had lived before the Earth was formed. She saw the first makers, entities of pure thought who had shaped the early universe through will alone. She saw their war with the primordials, a conflict that had lasted eons, and ended only with the primordials' imprisonment. She saw the placement of the artifacts, the selection of Earth as a prison world, the slow evolution of life as an unexpected but welcome side effect of the containment systems. And she saw the future, millions of possible futures, branching and collapsing based on the decision she was about to make. With the last of her fragmenting consciousness, Rodriguez activated the artifact. The pulse that emanated from it was visible from orbit, a sphere of light that expanded at the speed of thought, passing through matter as if it didn't exist. When it reached the primordial entities, they froze, Their chaotic forms suddenly locked into single states. The one in the Pacific let out a sound that shattered windows in cities thousands of miles away. A scream of rage and frustration that transcended the physical. Then, slowly and possibly, they began to sink back into the earth, drawn by forces that predated gravity, pulled back into prisons that were simultaneously ancient and newly formed. The artifact's activation had another effect that no one had anticipated. Every human within 1,000 miles of a primordial entity experienced a moment of cosmic consciousness, a brief glimpse of the universe as the first makers saw it. They understood, if only for an instant, the true nature of reality, the purpose of existence, the connection between all living things. Most forgot immediately, their brains unable to retain information that transcended human comprehension, but some remembered fragments, pieces of truth that would inspire a new age of scientific and philosophical advancement. Humanity had touched the divine, or something close enough to it, and even the briefest contact had changed them forever. When the light faded and the primordials were contained, the artifact fell to the floor of the C-17, now just a sphere of exotic metal, inert and harmless. Rodriguez was unconscious but alive, her mind somehow having survived the temporal backlash, though she would never speak of what she had experienced during those infinite seconds. The alien drones, their purpose fulfilled, dissolved into particles of light that dispersed on the Antarctic wind, and somewhere in the dimensional void between realities, Sentinel's consciousness flickered one last time, transmitting a final message to Earth. You have passed the test. The Watchers will remember. When you are ready, we will return. Until then, guard the prisons well. You are no longer alone in the universe, but you are now its protectors. The aftermath of what historians would call the primordial crisis reshaped human civilization in ways that no one could have predicted. In the 3 days following the containment, the world struggled to comprehend what had happened. The evidence was undeniable. Massive craters in the Pacific Ocean, where the entities had emerged, thousands of hours of footage, showing the alien craft, and the battle that had ensued, and most significantly, the testimonies of millions who had experienced the moment of cosmic consciousness when the artifact activated. President Walker addressed the United Nations General Assembly on March 19, 1997, in a speech that was broadcast to every corner of the globe. His words were simple but profound. 3 days ago, humanity faced extinction. We survived, not through our strength alone, but through cooperation with beings from beyond our world and sacrifice that transcended national boundary. We are no longer alone in the universe, and we now bear a responsibility that will define our species for generations to come. The revelation that Earth was a prison planet for entities older than the universe itself created a philosophical and religious crisis that rippled through every society. Some religions interpreted it as a confirmation of ancient texts that spoke of fallen angels imprisoned in the earth. Others saw it as evidence that humanity had a divine purpose, to be guardians of cosmic order. New movements emerged, some worshipping the first makers as the true creators, others viewing the primordials as misunderstood beings wrongly imprisoned. The Vatican held an unprecedented council, bringing together leaders from every major religion to discuss the theological implications. The Dalai Lama spoke of the interconnectedness of all consciousness across the universe. Islamic scholars debated whether the Watchers were the angels mentioned in the Quran. The one consensus was that humanity's understanding of its place in creation had fundamentally changed. The artifact, now dormant, was placed in a specially constructed facility beneath the Antarctic ice, exactly at the coordinates the Watchers had specified. The facility, jointly operated by all nuclear-capable nations, became the most heavily guarded location on Earth. Scientists studied it around the clock, trying to understand its construction and properties, but it remained largely mysterious. It had bonded at a quantum level with Earth's magnetic field and geological structure, becoming part of the planet's natural system. Attempts to move or analyze it too aggressively caused seismic disturbances that suggested the primordial prisons were still responsive to perceived threats. The message was clear: the artifact was now part of Earth, and Earth was now humanity's permanent responsibility. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez recovered physically from her activation of the artifact, but she was changed in ways that defied medical explanation. Brain scans showed new neural pathways that shouldn't exist, connections that seemed to extend beyond the physical structure of her brain. She reported dreams that weren't dreams but memories of other times and places. Visions of worlds where the primordials had won and reality had become fluid and chaotic. She could sometimes sense the prisons deep beneath the earth, feeling their inhabitants stirring in their sleep, testing their bonds, waiting for another opportunity to escape. The military wanted to study her, but she refused, retiring from service and disappearing into civilian life, though intelligence agencies kept her under discreet surveillance for the rest of her life. Dr. Webb led the international team analyzing the data the Watchers had transmitted, a treasure trove of scientific knowledge that advanced human understanding by centuries overnight. The mathematics alone revolutionized physics, showing that Einstein's theories were just simplified approximations of a much more complex reality. The biological data revealed that DNA was not just a chemical storage system, but a quantum information processor, capable of accessing higher dimensions. The technological specifications, while mostly beyond current manufacturing capabilities, provided roadmaps for developments that would take decades to achieve. But perhaps most importantly, the historical records showed that Earth was one of thousands of worlds being monitored, part of a vast experiment in consciousness evolution that spanned millions of years. The economic impact was immediate and severe. Stock markets crashed as investors tried to process the implications of alien contact and primordial threats, but they rebounded surprisingly quickly as governments announced massive cooperative ventures to develop defensive technologies. Based on the Watchers' data, the military-industrial complex of every major nation pivoted from preparing for war with each other to preparing for threats from beyond Earth or beneath it. The space race reignited with new urgency, not to beat other nations but to establish monitoring stations that could detect future primordial emergencies or alien visits. For the first time in history, humanity had a common enemy, even if that enemy was locked away beneath their feet, and this shared threat created unprecedented cooperation. 6 months after the crisis, strange reports began coming in from around the world. The locations of the other 12 artifacts revealed during the crisis were experiencing unusual phenomena. In Egypt, beneath the Great Pyramid, construction workers reported hearing harmonious tones that seemed to come from the bedrock itself. In Peru, near Machu Picchu, local shamans claimed they could feel a presence awakening, not malevolent but watchful. In the Himalayas, monks at isolated monasteries reported shared dreams of geometric patterns that hurt to contemplate, but contained profound meaning. The artifacts were responding to something, perhaps to each other, perhaps to changes in human consciousness, or perhaps to something approaching from deep space. Dr. Hammond, now leading a new international organization called the Primordial Watch, coordinated efforts to monitor these sites. Each location was discreetly fortified with sensors and security, hidden from public view to prevent panic or interference. The data they collected was disturbing. The artifacts were definitely active, generating low-level electromagnetic fields that pulsed in synchronization across the planet. Mathematical analysis suggested they were counting down to something, but the timeline was measured in decades or centuries, not days or years. Whatever they were preparing for, humanity would have time to prepare as well, assuming they used that time wisely. The social changes were perhaps the most profound. The knowledge that humanity was not alone, that Earth harbored ancient prisoners, and that our species had been chosen or had evolved to be their guards, created a shift in collective consciousness. Environmental movements gained massive support, as people realized that damaging the planet might weaken the prisons. International conflicts decreased dramatically, as nations recognized that human disputes were trivial compared to cosmic threats. Science and education received unprecedented funding as governments realized that technological advancement was now a matter of species survival. Children grew up knowing that the universe was inhabited, that reality was more complex than anyone had imagined, and that they were part of a generation that would have to be ready for anything. Secret societies that had claimed knowledge of aliens for decades suddenly found themselves vindicated and scrutinized. Some had genuine information that proved valuable to researchers. Others were exposed as frauds or delusional. The most interesting discovery came from a group in Tibet that had maintained records for over 1,000 years, describing periodic adjustments to reality that corresponded with times when the primordial prisons had weakened. According to their texts, human consciousness itself was part of the containment system, that our collective belief in ordered reality helped maintain the prisons. This theory, initially dismissed as mysticism, gained credibility when quantum physicists realized it aligned with what they were learning from the Watchers' data about consciousness and its role in shaping reality. 1 year after the crisis, on March 15, 1998, something unexpected happened. Every person who had been within the artifact's activation radius, approximately 3 million people, experienced a simultaneous vision. They saw Sentinel, not as the alien form they had witnessed, but as a pattern of pure thought. The message was brief but clear. The Watchers had not abandoned Earth. They were observing from dimensions humanity couldn't yet perceive, ensuring the prisons held, waiting for our species to mature enough for proper contact. They showed visions of possible futures, some where humanity joined a galactic community of unimaginable diversity and wonder, others where the primordials escaped and reality collapsed into chaos. The choice, Sentinel explained, was always humanity's to make. Every decision, every advancement, every moment of cooperation or conflict shifted the probability toward one future or another. President Walker, now in his final year of office, established the Global Containment Protocol, a secret agreement between all world powers that transcended politics and would bind future generations. The protocol outlined humanity's responsibilities as prison guards, established procedures for responding to primordial activity, and created frameworks for sharing technology and information that could strengthen the containment. It was ratified in secret by every major government, creating a shadow organization that would operate regardless of surface political changes. The public would be told what they needed to know to prevent panic, but the full truth would be preserved and passed down through carefully selected individuals in each generation. 5 years had passed since the primordial crisis, and the world of 2002 looked dramatically different from the one that had existed before humanity learned of its cosmic responsibility. The Global Containment Protocol had evolved into a sophisticated network of monitoring stations, research facilities and rapid response teams stationed at strategic points around the globe. Dr. Marcus Webb, now Director of Xenological Studies at the newly established International Institute for Cosmic Defense, stood in his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the very waters where everything had changed. On his desk lay reports that would have seemed like science fiction just years ago, documenting gravitational anomalies in the Mariana Trench, electromagnetic fluctuations around the hidden artifacts, and most disturbingly increasing evidence that the primordials were not dormant but actively testing their prisons from within. The first major incident after the initial crisis had occurred in 2001 when deep drilling in Siberia had accidentally breached a minor containment field. The primordial fragment that escaped was microscopic by cosmic standards but still caused reality distortions across 300 square kilometers before emergency teams could activate a portable containment device, reverse-engineered from the Watchers' technology. The event was hidden from the public under the cover story of a chemical plant explosion, but it served as a harsh reminder that humanity was still learning how to be effective prison guards. The Russian team that had contained the breach reported experiencing temporal displacement, with some members aging years in minutes while others experienced time loops that took weeks of specialized treatment to break. Rodriguez, despite her desire for a quiet life, had been drawn back into service as humanity's only living person who had directly interfaced with the artifact. Her unique neural patterns allowed her to sense primordial activity before any instrument could detect it. She had become something between human and cosmic sensor, able to feel the tremors in reality that preceded an emergence event. The visions that plagued her sleep had evolved into a form of precognition, showing her possible breach scenarios days or weeks before they might occur. The military had given her the unofficial title of Oracle, though she preferred to think of herself as an early warning system. Her daughter, now graduated and working as a physicist, had joined the Primordial Watch, determined to understand what had happened to her mother and how to protect others from similar experiences. The economic transformation that had begun immediately after the crisis had accelerated beyond all predictions. The declassified Watcher technology had sparked a new industrial revolution. Quantum computers that operated on principles humans barely understood were solving problems that would have taken classical computers millennia. Medical technology had advanced by decades in just 5 years, with treatments that could repair genetic damage and extend human lifespans significantly. Energy production had been revolutionized by zero-point field generators that pulled power from the quantum vacuum itself. But every advancement came with the sobering knowledge that they were still using the simplified, safe versions of technologies whose full potential could reshape or destroy reality if misused. The social impact had been equally profound. The generation of children who had come of age knowing about aliens and primordials thought differently than their parents. They dreamed bigger, feared less, and accepted the impossible as probable. Universities couldn't train scientists and engineers fast enough to meet demand. Philosophy and consciousness studies had become as important as physics and engineering. The Vatican had officially acknowledged the existence of non-terrestrial intelligence and was working to reconcile religious doctrine with cosmic reality. New religions had emerged, some worshipping the Watchers, others venerating the first makers, and a concerning few that saw the primordials as gods wrongly imprisoned. These latter groups were closely monitored by intelligence agencies, as their beliefs could potentially weaken the collective consciousness that helped maintain the prisons. In the depths of the Pacific, something was stirring that had the entire Primordial Watch on high alert. The crater left by the original emergence had never fully healed, remaining as a wound in the ocean floor that went deeper than any submersible could explore. Recent expeditions using robotic probes, hardened against reality distortion, had detected structures down there, not primordial but not natural either. They appeared to be ruins of some kind, perhaps remnants of whatever civilization had originally built the prisons. The architecture, if it could be called that, existed in more than 3 dimensions, causing the probe's cameras to malfunction as they tried to capture images of spaces that human eyes couldn't properly perceive. More disturbing were the signs of recent activity, energy signatures suggesting something was still operational down there, waiting. Dr. Hammond convened an emergency meeting of the Primordial Watch's Leadership Council on November 3, 2002. The data she presented was alarming. All 13 artifacts were showing synchronized activity for the first time since the crisis. But this wasn't the countdown they had been monitoring. This was something new, a response to an external stimulus. Something was approaching Earth. Something that was causing the artifacts to activate defensive protocols that hadn't been documented in any of the Watchers' data. The implications were terrifying. If the artifacts were preparing for something, it meant a threat that even the first makers had anticipated, something that might be worse than the primordials themselves. The detection came from the Deep Space Monitoring Array that had been constructed using Watcher technology. An object, or perhaps a phenomenon, was approaching from the direction of the Sagittarius constellation. It wasn't following any trajectory that made sense according to physics, sometimes appearing to move backward in time, sometimes existing in multiple locations simultaneously. Its signature matched nothing in the Watcher's database, but it was definitely artificial and definitely heading for Earth. Initial calculations suggested it would arrive in 6 months, though given its non-linear movement, it could appear at any moment or might have already arrived in the past, and was working its way forward to the present. President Jennifer Hayes, who had succeeded Walker and inherited the impossible burden of protecting humanity from cosmic threats, authorized Protocol 7, the highest level of defensive readiness short of attempting to evacuate the planet. Every military asset capable of operating in space was mobilized. The 3 orbital defense platforms constructed using hybrid human-Watcher technology were brought online. Nuclear arsenals were reconfigured with dimensional disruption warheads that could theoretically damage entities existing partially outside normal space. Most importantly, attempts were made to contact the Watchers using the quantum communication array built into the Antarctic facility. The messages sent were simple: unknown entity approaching, request assistance. Humanity stands ready. The response came not through the communication array but through Rodriguez, who collapsed during a routine monitoring session. Her consciousness pulled into a vision more vivid than any before. She found herself in a space that wasn't space, facing Sentinel and other beings she recognized as Watchers. But they appeared diminished, weakened, as if maintaining communication was draining them. Sentinel's message was urgent and terrifying. The Devourers have found your world. They consume realities, feeding on the energy released when ordered existence collapses into chaos. They are drawn to primordial prisons because breaching them releases the energy they need to reproduce. We cannot intervene directly. We exist now only as consciousness preserved in quantum foam, but we can guide. The artifacts are not just prison anchors. They are weapons, but weapons that require human consciousness to activate. You must unite your species' mental energy, every human mind focused on a single thought of preservation and defiance. The vision ended with Rodriguez screaming, blood running from her eyes and ears, but she had retained the information, along with specifications for a device that could link human consciousness through the artifacts. It would require connecting every human brain to a quantum field generated by the artifacts, creating a collective consciousness that could wield the prison system as both shield and sword. The catch was that it had never been tested, and failure could result in the entire human species suffering permanent psychological dissolution, their minds scattered across dimensions like Rodriguez had nearly experienced. The choice was between certain annihilation by the Devourers or potential obliteration through their own defense. As February 2003 approached, with the Devourer entity now visible through optical telescopes as a wound in space that stars disappeared into, humanity faced its second extinction crisis in 6 years. But this time, they weren't helpless observers rescued by alien intervention. This time, they were Earth's defenders, armed with stolen fire from the gods and the terrible knowledge that the universe was far more dangerous than even their nightmares had imagined. Cities around the world began constructing consciousness amplifiers based on Rodriguez's vision. Religious leaders, scientists and philosophers worked together to prepare humanity for a unity of thought that had never been attempted. Children were taught meditation techniques that would allow them to contribute to the collective defense without losing their individual identity. The final preparations were haunted by a terrible irony. Humanity had spent its entire history learning to think independently, to value individual consciousness and freedom of thought. Now, survival depended on doing the opposite, on becoming a single unified mind capable of wielding cosmic forces. The primordials stirred in their prisons, sensing the approaching Devourers, their rage and anticipation creating earthquakes and tsunamis that killed thousands. It was as if they were saying, "Release us and we will fight them, for they are our ancient enemies too." But releasing the primordials would only trade one form of annihilation for another. Humanity would have to stand alone, 7 billion individual minds becoming one species consciousness, wielding powers they didn't fully understand against an enemy that had consumed entire realities. The Devourer entity arrived on February 15, 2003, not with the violence of invasion but with the quiet horror of reality, simply ceasing to exist wherever it touched. It manifested first as an absence in the asteroid belt, a region where space itself seemed to have been eaten away, leaving not a void but something worse, a place where the concept of existence no longer applied. Jupiter's moons began disappearing one by one, not destroyed but unwritten from reality as if they had never been. The entity didn't move through space so much as space retreated from it, reality itself recoiling from something antithetical to its nature. Every telescope trained on it showed something different, as if it existed in a state of constant flux between being and unbeing, feeding on the boundary between existence and void. In bunkers and command centers around the world, the final preparations for humanity's desperate defense were underway. The consciousness amplifiers, towering structures that looked like crystalline trees, had been erected in 13 locations corresponding to the hidden artifacts. Each one was staffed by teams of neuroscientists, quantum physicists, and surprisingly artists and musicians, whose understanding of harmony and resonance proved crucial in calibrating the devices to human brainwaves. Rodriguez stood at the primary control station in Antarctica, her scarred neural pathways making her the only person capable of initiating the link between human consciousness and the artifact network. She was surrounded by monitors showing the status of 7 billion minds about to be connected in a way that violated every principle of individual existence that humanity had ever held sacred. President Hayes addressed the world in what many believed would be humanity's final hour. Her words were broadcast through every medium, reaching people in bunkers and buildings, in submarines beneath the ocean and space stations above the Earth. Today we face not just the end of our world but the end of our existence, the erasure of everything we have ever been or could ever become. But we do not face it as Americans or Russians, as Christians or Muslims, as rich or poor. We face it as one species, one consciousness, one defiant voice that says to the universe, we will not go quietly into the void. When the signal comes, do not resist the connection. Open your minds, release your fear, and together we will become something greater than the sum of our parts. Together we will prove that humanity deserves its place as guardians of this reality. At 14:00 GMT, as the Devourer entity crossed Mars's orbit, consuming the red planet's smaller moon Deimos in a process that took less than a second, Rodriguez activated the consciousness link. The sensation was indescribable for those who experienced it. 7 billion individual perspectives suddenly collapsed into one multifaceted awareness. Every human on Earth could feel every other human. Not their thoughts exactly, but their essence, their hopes and fears combined into a singular purpose. Children in Tokyo could sense the determination of soldiers in Washington. Elderly people in London felt the curiosity of scientists in Moscow. And through it all ran Rodriguez's consciousness like a conductor guiding an orchestra of billions. The artifacts responded immediately, their energy signatures spiking beyond anything previously recorded, creating pillars of light that shot from the Earth into space, visible even in daylight. The unified human consciousness, wielding the artifacts as focusing lenses, reached out toward the Devourer entity with a probe of pure thought, backed by the reality-anchoring power of the primordial prisons. What they found defied comprehension. The Devourer wasn't a being in any sense humans understood. It was more like a universal mistake, a glitch in the code of existence, that had gained something resembling awareness. It fed on the transition between order and chaos, existing in the moment when structured reality collapsed. It had no malevolence, no purpose beyond feeding, no more evil than entropy itself. But that made it no less dangerous. Through the link, humanity could sense its hunger, vast and endless, and worse, they could sense others behind it, a swarm of similar entities drawn by the prospect of primordial energy being released. The first defensive action was not an attack, but an assertion. 7 billion minds simultaneously, declaring, we exist, this space exists, this reality is valid and will remain so. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Devourer's advance slowed, its consumption of space around it diminishing as human consciousness reinforced the fabric of reality in its path. But it adapted quickly, beginning to attack the link itself, sending waves of unbeing that threatened to dissolve the connections between human minds. People began collapsing worldwide, their individual consciousness trying to reassert itself against the collective to escape the psychic assault. The weakness of the defense was clear. Human individuality, the very thing that made the species special, was also what made this unity unstable. It was a child in Mumbai, a 12-year-old girl named Priya, who had been born after the first primordial crisis, and had never known a world without cosmic threats, who provided the solution. Through the link, her thought resonated across billions of minds. We don't need to stop being individuals. We need to be individuals together, like instruments in a symphony, each playing our own note but creating harmony. The shift in approach was subtle, but profound. Instead of trying to merge into one consciousness, humanity began to synchronize, maintaining their individual perspectives, while aligning their intent. The defense transformed from a solid wall to a complex pattern, billions of unique responses to the Devourer's assault that were nevertheless coordinated in purpose. The battle, if it could be called that, took place across multiple dimensions simultaneously. In normal space, the artifacts projected beams of condensed reality that acted like antibodies against the Devourers' existence-consuming nature. In quantum dimensions, human consciousness wrestled with the entity's primitive awareness, trying to convince it that there was nothing here to feed on, that Earth was too strongly anchored to reality to be consumed. In temporal dimensions, the fight occurred across past and future simultaneously, with humanity's defenders sometimes winning battles that hadn't happened yet, or losing fights that had already been erased from history. The primordials in their prisons raged and thrashed, desperately wanting to join a battle against their ancient enemy but held fast by the very system humanity was using to defend itself. The turning point came when Rodriguez, her consciousness stretched to its absolute limit, coordinating billions of minds, made a desperate decision. She opened her scarred neural pathways completely, allowing the raw energy of the primordial prisons to flow through the human collective. It was like channeling the birth of a universe through 7 billion fragile human minds. The pain was indescribable, shared across every connected consciousness, but so was the power. For a brief moment, humanity wielded the same forces that had imprisoned entities older than time itself. The Devourer recoiled, not damaged but repelled, recognizing a power that could genuinely threaten its existence. It began to retreat, not fleeing but withdrawing like a tide, seeking easier feeding grounds in the vast cosmos. But the victory came at a cost. When the consciousness link was finally severed after 6 hours of continuous connection, humanity had been fundamentally changed. Every person who had participated, which was essentially the entire species, retained some residual connection to the collective. They could no longer read each other's thoughts, but they could sense the general emotional state of humanity as a whole. Depression and anxiety decreased dramatically as people realized they were never truly alone. Crime dropped to nearly zero as potential criminals could feel the pain they would cause resonating through the collective. But privacy, in the way it had existed before, was gone forever. Humanity had become something new, not a hive mind but a connected species, forever linked by the shared trauma and triumph of defending their reality. Rodriguez survived but was forever changed. Her consciousness had been the conduit for unimaginable energies, and her brain had been restructured at a quantum level. She could no longer distinguish between her thoughts and cosmic background radiation, couldn't tell if her memories were her own, or echoes from dimensions where history had gone differently. She was placed in a specialized facility where reality was kept stable through constant monitoring and adjustment, living in a bubble of enforced normalcy while her mind wandered through possibilities that human language couldn't describe. She became Oracle, patient and cautionary tale all at once, a reminder of the price of wielding forces beyond human comprehension. The Devourers' retreat didn't mean safety. Through the residual connection, humanity could sense other threats moving in the cosmic dark, drawn by the massive discharge of energy from their defense. The Watchers, in their diminished state, managed one final communication, warning that Earth had now been marked, identified as a world capable of wielding primordial energy. This made humanity incredibly valuable to some civilizations and incredibly dangerous to others. The quiet obscurity that had protected Earth for millions of years was gone. The planet was now a known quality in a universe full of powers that made the Watchers look primitive. Some would come as allies, others as conquerors, and some with purposes human minds couldn't fathom. The year following humanity's repulsion of the Devourer became known as the Great Awakening, though whether it was an awakening or a fundamental transformation of the species remained a matter of intense debate. The residual psychic connection that linked all humans had stabilized into what scientists called the consensus, a background hum of collective human consciousness that everyone could feel but few could directly access. Children born after the event seemed to navigate this new reality effortlessly, developing what appeared to be limited telepathic abilities, while older generations struggled with the loss of complete mental privacy. Suicide rates initially spiked, as some individuals couldn't handle feeling the weight of humanity's collective emotions, but support systems quickly evolved, teaching people how to shield their minds while remaining part of the greater whole. Dr. Reb, now in his 70s but kept vital by medical technology derived from Watcher data, stood before the United Nations General Assembly on March 15, 2004, exactly 7 years after the first primordial emergence. His presentation would reshape humanity's understanding of its future. We have confirmed contact with 12 different extraterrestrial civilizations in the past year, he announced to a room that would have erupted in chaos just a decade ago, but now listened with grim attention. 3 are offering alliance and technology exchange. 4 are demanding we surrender the artifacts and accept protectorate status. 2 appear to be studying us like laboratory specimens. The remaining 3 have agendas we cannot yet comprehend. Ladies and gentlemen, Earth has become a crossroads, and we must decide what kind of species we will become in this larger cosmos. The first to make formal contact had been the Symphonic Collective, a confederation of 6 species that had achieved harmony through shared consciousness, similar to humanity's new state. They arrived not in ships but as patterns of organized energy that coalesced into physical forms when needed. Their representative, a being of crystallized sound that spoke by creating harmonics in the air, offered to teach humanity how to properly manage their collective consciousness without losing individuality. In exchange, they wanted access to study the primordial prisons, claiming that understanding how such entities could be contained might help them deal with similar threats in their region of space. The offer was tempting, but accepting would mean revealing Earth's greatest vulnerability to an alien power whose true motivations remained unknown. More troubling was the arrival of the Hierarchs, a militaristic species that had built their empire on controlling primitive civilization. They came in massive dreadnoughts that parked just beyond lunar orbit, weapons powered by harvested stellar cores aimed at Earth. Their ultimatum was simple: surrender the artifacts and accept governance by the hierarchy or face obliteration. They claimed to be protecting Earth from itself, arguing that humanity was too primitive to wield such power responsibly. The only reason they hadn't attacked immediately was the demonstration against the Devourer, which had shown that humanity could potentially destroy the artifacts rather than let them be captured, a possibility the Hierarchs couldn't risk. The standoff had continued for 3 months, with neither side willing to make the first move. The most enigmatic visitors were the Observers, beings that existed partially outside normal space-time and seemed to experience past, present, and future simultaneously. They didn't communicate in any conventional sense but instead left artifacts that projected possible futures when touched. Each vision showed a different path for humanity, one where Earth became the capital of a vast interstellar alliance, another where humans transcended physical existence entirely, and a third terrifying vision where Earth was consumed by an escaped primordial that had learned to feed on the collective consciousness itself. The Observers seemed to be warning and teaching simultaneously, but their lessons were cryptic and often contradictory, as if they were seeing multiple versions of reality and couldn't determine which one would actually occur. Meanwhile, the primordial prisons had become increasingly unstable. The massive energy discharge from the Devourer defense had created hairline cracks in the containment fields. While not enough for the entities to escape, these fissures allowed them to project influence into our reality in subtle ways. People living near the prison sites reported shared nightmares of impossible geometries and cities that existed in too many dimensions. Animals fled these areas entirely, and plants grew in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Most disturbing were the reports of temporal anomalies, places where time moved differently, where people aged years in minutes or experienced the same day repeatedly, until they went mad. The primordials were testing their bounds, learning from humanity's defense against the Devourer, and potentially preparing their own escape attempt. Rodriguez, despite her fragmented mental state, had become humanity's most valuable asset in understanding these changes. Her consciousness, scattered across dimensions, could perceive things others couldn't. During a brief moment of lucidity, she revealed something that terrified the Primordial Watch leadership. "They're not just prisoners," she said, her voice overlapping with itself, as if speaking from multiple timelines simultaneously. "The primordials are part of the universe's immune system, antibodies against too much order. The first makers didn't just imprison them, they broke the universe's ability to self-regulate. Every reality needs chaos to evolve, and we've been keeping it locked away. The Devourers, the Hierarchs, all these threats, They're symptoms of a universe trying to rebalance itself. This revelation sparked a crisis within the global containment protocol. If Rodriguez was right, then humanity wasn't just guarding prisoners but maintaining an artificial order that was causing cascading problems throughout the cosmos. Some scientists argued for controlled release, allowing one primordial to escape in a confined area to see if it would stabilize the increasing cosmic threats. Others warned that any release would be catastrophic, that the primordials had been imprisoned for good reason and that the universe would adapt to their absence eventually. The debate raged while reality itself seemed to grow more unstable, with reports of spontaneous dimensional rifts appearing worldwide, allowing glimpses into alternate Earths where history had unfolded differently. President Hayes, now in her second term and aging rapidly from the stress of managing humanity's cosmic responsibilities, made a decision that would define Earth's future. She authorized Project Synthesis, a desperate attempt to find a middle ground between order and chaos. The plan involved using the artifacts not to strengthen the prisons but to transform them, converting the primordials from entities of pure chaos into something that could exist within ordered reality without destroying it. It would require cooperation from at least one of the alien civilizations, technology beyond current human capability, and most crucially, volunteers willing to merge their consciousness with a primordial to guide its transformation. It was madness, but in a universe where madness and sanity had become increasingly difficult to distinguish, it might be the only sane choice. The call for volunteers was answered by thousands, people who had been most affected by the collective consciousness event and felt called to something greater. Among them was Rodriguez's daughter, Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, who had spent years studying her mother's condition and believed she understood how to survive direct contact with primordial consciousness. The selection process was brutal, testing not just psychological stability but the ability to maintain individual identity while experiencing infinite possibilities simultaneously. Only 13 candidates were chosen, one for each prison site, though everyone knew that most if not all would not survive the process intact. As preparations for Project Synthesis began, new threats emerged. The hierarchs, sensing Earth's vulnerability during this transition, began moving their fleet closer. The Symphonic Collective warned that transforming the primordials might attract the attention of the architects, legendary beings that supposedly designed the fundamental laws of physics and didn't tolerate alterations to their creation. The observers left a final artifact that showed only one image: Earth transformed into something beautiful and terrible, neither fully ordered nor chaotic, with humanity evolved into something that was no longer recognizable as human but undeniably magnificent. Whether this was a warning or a promise, no one could say. On the eve of Project Synthesis, as the 13 volunteers prepared to enter the consciousness amplifiers for possibly the last time, humanity held its collective breath. The psychic consensus hummed with fear, hope, and desperate determination. Children around the world reported the same dream: a vast cosmic ocean, with Earth as a small island of light, surrounded by storms of chaos and rigid structures of absolute order, with humanity standing on the shore, preparing to wade into waters that could either drown them or teach them to swim in dimensions they had never imagined. The dream ended the same way for everyone, with a voice that might have been Rodriguez, or might have been the planet itself, saying, "The prison and the prisoner are one. To free ourselves, we must free them. To save reality, we must risk everything." The Project Synthesis began at precisely midnight GMT on June 21, 2004, the summer solstice, when the Earth's relationship with the Sun was at its most extreme. The 13 volunteers, including Sarah Rodriguez, were positioned at each prison site, connected through consciousness amplifiers that had been modified with technology gifted by the Symphonic Collective and stolen from intercepted hierarch transmissions. The plan was elegant in its impossibility. Rather than fighting the primordials or keeping them imprisoned, humanity would attempt to teach them how to exist within ordered reality, to give chaos a structured form that wouldn't destroy everything it touched. It was like trying to teach fire not to burn while still allowing it to be fire, a paradox that should have been impossible but might, just might, work in a universe where consciousness could reshape reality. Sarah Rodriguez stood in the Antarctic facility, surrounded by the impossible geometries of the primary artifact, feeling her mother's fragmented presence all around her. Maria Rodriguez had been moved to the facility for this moment, her shattered consciousness serving as a bridge between human thought and cosmic impossibility. As Sarah placed hers on the consciousness amplifier, she heard her mother's voice, clearer than it had been in years. The secret isn't to fight them or contain them, but to show them that order can be beautiful too, that structure doesn't mean prison, that reality doesn't mean limitation. You're not their wardens anymore. You're their teachers. The words echoed through the consensus, reaching all 13 volunteers simultaneously, and with them came an understanding that transcended human language. The activation was unlike anything from the previous defenses. Instead of projecting force outward, the amplifiers pulled the volunteers' consciousness inward, down through the Earth's crust, through layers of rock and time, to the spaces between spaces where the primordials had been held for millions of years. What they found there defied every expectation. The primordials weren't monsters or malevolent forces. They were artists of chaos, creators whose medium was possibility itself, and they had been trapped in a single frozen moment for eons, unable to express their nature, unable to create or destroy or change. The prisons hadn't just contained them, they had tortured them with stasis, and their rage wasn't evil but the desperate thrashing of beings denied their fundamental nature. Sarah was the first to make contact, her consciousness touching the primordial beneath Antarctica. The sensation was like diving into an ocean of liquid thought, where every drop was a different possibility, a different way reality could be. She felt herself beginning to dissolve, her individual identity scattered across infinite potential futures and past. But her mother's presence anchored her, showing her how to maintain coherence within chaos, how to be both one and many simultaneously. Through tremendous effort, she projected a single thought into the chaos. We want to learn from you, and we want to teach you. Order and chaos don't have to be enemies. They can dance together. The primordial's response wasn't words but a shift in the patterns around her. Curiosity replacing rage for the first time in millions of years. Around the world, the other volunteers were having similar experiences, each primordial responding differently to contact. In Egypt, the volunteer found a primordial that communicated through mathematical equations that described impossible geometry. In Peru, the entity expressed itself through music that existed in frequencies humans couldn't normally perceive. In the Pacific, where the first emergence had occurred, the volunteer discovered that this primordial had been watching humanity through the cracks in its prison, learning about ordered life, developing something almost like empathy. Not all contacts were successful. 3 volunteers were immediately overwhelmed, their consciousness scattered beyond recovery, their bodies entering catatonic states from which they would never recover. But the remaining 10 held on, building bridges of understanding across the gap between order and chaos. The transformation began slowly, almost imperceptibly. The primordials weren't being changed so much as taught how to change themselves, how to exist within reality without destroying it. The process was visible from space as pillars of light erupted from each prison site. Not the harsh light of conflict, but something softer, more complex, like aurora borealis given solid form. The hierarchs, watching from their dreadnoughts, began powering up their weapons, interpreting the event as either an attack or a catastrophic failure of containment. But before they could fire, something extraordinary happened. The observers, who had remained passive throughout all previous events, suddenly materialized between Earth and the hierarch fleet, their forms shifting through dimensions in a clear warning: do not interfere. Inside the consciousness link, Sarah and the other volunteers were experiencing something unprecedented. The primordials were showing them the universe as it existed before. Order was imposed. A realm of infinite possibility where thought and reality were one, where every imaginable thing existed simultaneously. It was beautiful and terrifying, and Sarah understood why the first makers had feared it, but she also understood why it was necessary. Pure order led to stagnation and death. Pure chaos led to meaninglessness and dissolution. Life, consciousness, growth, all existed in the tension between the two. The primordials weren't enemies of existence. They were half of what made existence possible. The transformation wasn't about destroying either force, but about teaching them to coexist. The merger began at 12:34 a.m. when the first primordial, the one beneath Antarctica, successfully manifested in ordered reality without destroying it. It appeared as a constantly shifting geometric form that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, visible to human eyes as a kind of living aurora that painted impossible colors across the Antarctic sky. It was still chaos, still fundamentally alien to ordered reality, but it was controlled chaos, directed possibility, creativity given form. Sarah's consciousness was still linked to it, and through her it spoke to humanity for the first time. Its voice, a harmony of millions of possibilities, collapsed into words. We remember, before the prison, before the war, when order and chaos danced. We had forgotten. You have reminded us. We can be both destroyer and creator, both end and beginning. One by one, the other primordials began their transformations. Not all succeeded. 2 retreated back into their prisons. 2 damaged by eons of containment to trust the process. 1 attempted to escape entirely, causing a massive earthquake in the Pacific before the others, the transformed ones, helped to contain it, showing for the first time that primordials could work together with ordered beings toward a common goal. The sight of chaos entities helping to maintain reality rather than destroy it sent shockwaves through every observing civilization. The hierarchs, faced with something completely outside their understanding, withdrew their fleet to what they considered a safe distance. The symphonic collective sent urgent requests for detailed data, recognizing that humanity had achieved something thought impossible. As dawn broke on June 22nd, the world had changed in ways that would take generations to fully understand. 7 primordials now existed in a transformed state, neither fully chaos nor fully ordered, but something new. They didn't remain on Earth. The planet was too small, too fragile for their continued presence. Instead, they dispersed into space, but not as threats. They went as gardeners of possibility, seeking dead worlds to remake, empty spaces to fill with new forms of existence that blended order and chaos in ways that had never been tried before. They remained connected to humanity through the volunteers who had facilitated their transformation, a permanent link between Earth and forces that could reshape reality itself. Sarah Rodriguez survived the process, but like her mother, she was forever changed. Her consciousness existed partially in normal space, and partially in the realm of possibility the primordials inhabited. She could see potential futures spreading out from every decision, every action, like branches of an infinite tree. She became humanity's guide to navigating the new reality they had created, teaching others how to work with chaos rather than against it, how to find creativity in uncertainty, how to dance on the edge between order and dissolution. The consensus, humanity's collective consciousness, evolved to incorporate this new understanding, becoming less rigid, more fluid, more capable of adaptation and growth. The aftermath brought unexpected consequences. The universe itself seemed to respond to the transformation. The dimensional rifts that had been appearing worldwide stabilized into permanent gateways to alternate realities, allowing controlled exploration of different versions of Earth. The Devourers, those entities that fed on the transition between order and chaos, began avoiding Earth's region of space entirely, sensing something that could threaten their existence. New civilizations made contact, drawn by the unprecedented event, some offering alliance, others demanding to know how humanity had achieved the impossible. Earth had become not just a known quantity but a crucial player in cosmic politics, holding knowledge that could reshape the fundamental nature of reality. President Hayes, addressing the United Nations for the last time before the end of her term, spoke words that would be remembered as the moment humanity truly became a cosmic species. We are no longer just the guardians of ancient prison. We are the bridge between order and chaos, the species that proved these forces can coexist. We have transformed our greatest threat into our greatest teacher. The primordials are free, but so are we, free from the fear of chaos, free from the rigidity of absolute order, free to explore a universe that is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. Our children will grow up in a reality where the impossible is merely improbable, where creativity and structure dance together, where humanity's role is not to maintain the status quo but to help the universe evolve into something new. The transformation of the primordials marked the end of one chapter of human history and the beginning of another. The artifacts, no longer needed as prison anchors, evolved into something else. Beacons that broadcast Earth's location not as a warning but as an invitation to civilizations ready to explore the balance between order and chaos. The Watchers, in their diminished state, sent one final message through the quantum foam: "You have exceeded our highest hopes. Where we failed through force, you succeeded through understanding. The universe watches to see what you will become." Rodriguez, the first human to interface with alien technology, lived to see her daughter achieve what she had only glimpsed: the reconciliation of forces that had been at war since the universe began. Humanity's nuclear arsenal, the weapons that had once threatened their own extinction, had become tools of cosmic defense and transformation. The plan to nuke an alien mothership had evolved into something far more profound, using those same weapons to help save not just Earth, but potentially the entire universe from the endless cycle of order versus chaos. The Pacific Ocean, where it all began, became a pilgrimage site, where people came to meditate on the balance between structure and possibility, where the memorial to the crisis stood, not as a monument to victory, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to stop fighting and start understanding. As the years passed, children born after the transformation grew up with abilities that would have been called supernatural in earlier times. They could sense the flow of probability, occasionally stepping slightly outside normal space-time, creating art that existed in more than 3 dimensions. Humanity was evolving, not through genetic manipulation but through consciousness expansion, becoming something that could stand as equals with civilizations millions of years older. The price had been enormous: thousands dead, millions traumatized, the very nature of human existence fundamentally altered. But the reward was a future unlimited by the constraints that had bound every previous generation, a future where humanity's role in the universe was not as subjects or servants, but as partners in the ongoing creation of reality itself. The story of the declassified plan to nuke an alien mothership over the Pacific had become legend, taught in schools not as history but as mythology that happened to be true. It reminded every generation that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a bomb but understanding that the greatest enemy might become the greatest teacher, and that humanity's strength lay not in its ability to destroy but in its capacity to transform the impossible into the possible. The universe was vast, strange, and often terrifying, but humanity had earned its place in it, not through conquest but through the courage to embrace both order and chaos, to stand at the intersection of impossibility and make it home. And in the depths of space, the transformed primordials continued their work, creating new realities that blended structure and chaos, occasionally sending back messages through the volunteers who had freed them, messages that always ended the same way: "Thank you for teaching us to dance."